Across the long timeline of video games, subtle details have quietly endured, passing unnoticed from one generation to the next. Facts that drift through generations, hidden in code and conversation, waiting to be noticed. The world of Pokémon carries these moments, scattered across decades of design choices, programming quirks, and developer decisions that shaped how millions of players experienced their journeys. Before we drift off, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an upload, and let me know where you're watching from. And the first thread appears softly in a detail most players never encountered, where Ruby and Sapphire carried something unusual for their time. Game Boy Advance cartridges sat in small plastic shells, holding worlds that couldn't connect to any network. The year was 2003, and internet connectivity for handheld games remained years away from becoming standard. Players who discovered bugs or glitches in their copies had no download servers to patch their games, no wireless updates waiting in the background. This created a problem for Game Freak when they realized Ruby and Sapphire contained an issue with the internal clock, one that would break after extended playtime, disrupting time-based events and berry growth. The solution they devised became one of the most creative workarounds in gaming history. Rather than asking players to purchase new cartridges with corrected code, they embedded the patch inside newer games. Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emerald all carried this hidden repair tool, waiting silently in their code. A player could connect their Ruby or Sapphire cartridge to one of these newer games using a link cable, then press a specific button combination on the title screen, and the patch would transfer across the cable, rewriting portions of the older cartridge's data. This method of patching games through cartridge-to-cartridge connection had never been attempted before on this scale. The technical constraints were significant, as the patch had to be small enough to fit within the available space, while also being robust enough to fix the clock issue permanently. Game Freak's programmers spent considerable time ensuring the patch wouldn't corrupt save data or cause other unforeseen problems. The process worked flawlessly, allowing players to repair their games without losing their progress or needing to start fresh on a new cartridge. What made this even more interesting was the reward hidden inside the patching process. Players who successfully installed the update and had an empty slot in their party would receive a shiny Zigzagoon, its golden fur marking it as one of the rarest color variations. This small gift served as confirmation that the patch had installed correctly, turning a technical necessity into a memorable moment. The Zigzagoon appeared at level 5, low enough that it wouldn't disrupt game balance, but special enough that players remembered receiving it. For players who owned only a single copy of Ruby or Sapphire and lacked the additional hardware needed to perform the patch themselves, Nintendo offered an alternative solution. They would accept cartridges mailed directly to them, patch the games in their facilities, and return them to their owners. This service continued operating until August of 2012, nearly a decade after Ruby and Sapphire's initial release and well into the Nintendo 3DS era. The longevity of this support demonstrated Nintendo's commitment to maintaining their older products, even as new hardware generations came and went. Before you drift off, maybe tap subscribe for more gentle videos, and let me know where you're listening from tonight. The patching service required players to send their physical cartridges through postal mail, trusting that their save files containing hundreds of hours of progress would return safely. Nintendo provided detailed instructions for packaging the cartridges securely, and they also maintained careful tracking systems to ensure no games were lost during the process. Players who utilized this service often waited several weeks for their cartridges to make the round trip, but most reported receiving their games back in perfect condition with the patch successfully applied. This level of customer support for a handheld game from 2003 remains remarkable even by modern standards. Another quiet detail appears when examining how regions were named across different language versions of the games. Most Pokémon regions maintained consistent pronunciation patterns across English, Spanish, German, and French releases, allowing international players to recognize familiar locations regardless of their native language. Kanto sounded like Kanto, Johto like Johto, with minor variations in spelling, but similar phonetic structures. The Unova region broke from this pattern in notable ways, carrying distinctly different names depending on the language version. In Japanese versions, the region wasn't called Unova at all, but Ishu, a name with completely different syllables and sounds. Spanish versions referred to the same region as Tesselia, another departure from the English naming convention. These variations stemmed from the region's inspiration sources, as Unova drew heavily from the United States, specifically New York City, and surrounding areas. The name Ishu in Japanese referenced the concept of diverse states coming together, while Tesselia connected to historical naming patterns used in Spanish geographic tradition. English speakers received Unova, a name blending unity and nova, suggesting both togetherness and new beginnings. This naming flexibility reflected the fifth generation's ambitious scope. Black and White represented a complete refresh of the Pokémon formula, introducing an entirely new regional Pokédex with no returning species available until after completing the main story. The developers wanted the experience to feel fresh and unfamiliar, similar to how Red and Blue felt to players encountering Pokémon for the first time. The varied regional names across languages reinforced this sense of discovery, as even longtime fans couldn't automatically assume they understood everything about the new region. The starter Pokémon introduced in Black and White carried their own historical connections, each line representing different empires from human history. Snivy and its evolutions drew inspiration from French nobility and the French Empire, with Serperior's regal bearing and design elements echoing aristocratic aesthetics. The grass snake's elegant movements and superior attitude reflected French cultural values of sophistication and refinement. Its signature move, Leaf Storm, even created patterns resembling elaborate gardens like those found in French palaces. Tepig's evolutionary line connected to the Chinese Empire, with the Embor displaying armor designs and fighting styles reminiscent of Chinese warriors. The firefighting type combination might have disappointed some players, hoping for more type variety among fire starters, but the specific martial arts influences distinguished Embor from previous firefighting Pokémon. Its stance and move animations drew from Chinese combat traditions, and its coloring evoked the red and gold commonly associated with Chinese imperial imagery. The decision to base a pig Pokémon on Chinese culture also connected to the zodiac symbolism present in Chinese tradition. Oshawott and its evolution into Samurott represented the Japanese Empire, with clear samurai influences in both design and naming. Samurott's appearance shifted dramatically from its pre-evolution, standing on 4 legs instead of 2 and wielding bladed shells like katanas. This transformation from playful otter to serious warrior reflected the journey young samurai underwent during their training. The strict code of honor and disciplined combat style associated with samurai culture manifested in Samurott's serious demeanor and powerful water attacks. These cultural connections gave the 5th generation starters a depth that extended beyond their type combinations. Players who understood the historical references could appreciate the thought put into each design, while those unfamiliar with the inspirations simply enjoyed the Pokémon as characters. This layered approach to design allowed different audiences to engage with the same content at different levels, finding meaning that resonated with their own knowledge and interests. Black and White received particular praise for their storytelling quality, widely considered among the best narratives the main series had produced. The Tale of N, Team Plasma, and the conflict between truth and ideals created moral complexity rarely seen in Pokémon games. Players questioned whether catching and training Pokémon was truly ethical, a theme that resonated with longtime fans who had never seriously considered the implications of their virtual adventures. The story didn't provide easy answers, instead presenting perspectives from multiple characters and allowing players to draw their own conclusions. Developing this narrative required significant time and resources. Director Junichi Masuda stated in interviews that Game Freak spent approximately 1 year and 6 months focusing specifically on the story and character development for Black and White. This extended development period represented a departure from previous games, which typically devoted less time to narrative elements in favor of gameplay mechanics and monster design. The investment paid off as Black and White's story became a frequent topic of discussion in fan communities and gaming media. The extended story development included creating detailed backstories for major characters, plotting out the dramatic reveals that occurred throughout the journey, and ensuring that the moral questions raised early in the game found satisfying exploration by the end. N's character arc required particular care, as his role as both antagonist and sympathetic figure needed to feel earned rather than forced. The writer spent considerable time ensuring his dialogue reflected his unique upbringing and worldview, making him one of the most memorable characters in the franchise. Another quiet detail surfaces when examining the design process during Ruby and Sapphire's development. Masuda revealed that the team seriously considered changing fundamental aspects of the battle system, specifically the number of moves each Pokémon could learn and potentially the size of the player's party. These core mechanics had remained unchanged since Red and Green first released in Japan in 1996. 7 years later, the development team questioned whether the traditional limits still served the game's best interests. The discussions centered on whether expanding move slots from 4 to 5 or 6 would create more interesting strategic options during battles. 4 moves often felt restrictive, forcing players to choose between coverage moves, status moves, and their Pokémon's best attacks. Adding more slots could allow for greater team variety and more complex battle scenarios. However, the team ultimately decided against making changes, recognizing that the 4-move limit created meaningful strategic decisions that would be diluted by adding more options. The constraint forced players to carefully consider their movesets rather than simply teaching their Pokémon everything useful. Similarly, increasing party size from 6 Pokémon might have allowed players to bring more of their favorites on their journey, but it would have created significant balance issues. Gym leaders and other trainers would need to carry more Pokémon to remain challenging, potentially making battles feel tedious rather than strategic. The interface would also become cluttered, as managing 8 or 10 Pokémon simultaneously would require redesigning menu systems and battle screens. The developers recognized that 6 Pokémon represented a sweet spot between variety and manageability. These discussions never advanced beyond the planning stage, but their existence reveals how even fundamental game mechanics undergo periodic evaluation during development. The team didn't simply assume that established rules should remain unchanged forever. They actively questioned whether those rules still served the game's goals, only preserving them after determining they remained the best solution. This willingness to reconsider core elements demonstrates the thoughtful approach Game Freak brought to each new generation. Ruby and Sapphire also marked the first main series games to abandon the "gotta catch 'em all" slogan that had defined the franchise's marketing since its inception. This change wasn't arbitrary, but reflected a practical reality facing players at the time. When Ruby and Sapphire launched, completing the national Pokédex was literally impossible using only those two games. The transition from Game Boy Color to Game Boy Advance had created technical incompatibilities that prevented transferring Pokémon from older generations. The hardware architecture of the Game Boy Advance differed significantly from its predecessor, using different data structures and encryption methods for Pokémon storage. Additionally, Ruby and Sapphire introduced new mechanics, like abilities and natures, that didn't exist in previous generations, making direct transfers complex from a technical standpoint. Rather than creating a compromised transfer system that might corrupt data or cause glitches, Game Freak initially released Ruby and Sapphire as standalone games with no backward compatibility. This decision created what fans called the Generation 3 gap, a period where entire evolutionary lines and legendary Pokémon became temporarily inaccessible. Players who had spent years building collections in gold, silver, and crystal watched their teams become stranded on outdated hardware. The situation generated considerable frustration within the community, as the promise of bringing your Pokémon forward through every new generation had been a core appeal of the franchise. Game Freak addressed this problem throughout the third generation's lifespan. The release of Fire Red and Leaf Green provided access to the original 151 Pokémon using modern game mechanics, while Emerald expanded the available species further. The GameCube titles, Colosseum and XD, introduced additional Pokémon that couldn't be caught in the Game Boy Advance games, including several Generation 2 species. Eventually, the developers created the Pal Park feature in Diamond and Pearl, finally allowing transfers from Ruby, Sapphire, Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emerald to the fourth generation. Even with these additions, completing the National Pokédex in Ruby and Sapphire remained one of the most challenging tasks in franchise history. Players needed access to multiple games across different platforms, event-exclusive distributions, and often multiple copies of the same game to obtain every species. The difficulty of this undertaking made catching all Pokémon in Generation 3 a badge of honor among dedicated fans, representing hundreds of hours of effort and coordination. The limited nature of Ruby and Sapphire extended to in-game trades, which appeared less frequently than in previous generations. Only 3 NPCs across the entire Hoenn region offered trades, the lowest count in any main series Pokémon game. By comparison, Gold and Silver contained 6 in-game trades, while Red and Blue featured 9. The 3 available trades in Ruby and Sapphire involved exchanging a Makuhita for a Slakoth in Rustboro City, trading a Skitty for a Pikachu in Fortree City, and swapping a Bellosome for a Corsola in Pacifidlog Town. These trades generally offered poor value compared to what players could obtain through normal gameplay. The Corsola trade exemplified this problem particularly well. Players giving up a Bellosome, which required them either finding a rare Gloom and using a Sunstone, or evolving an Oddish all the way through its evolutionary line, would receive a Corsola that could be caught in the same general area by simply using a fishing rod. The Corsola appeared somewhat rarely, but finding one through fishing required far less effort than fully evolving a grass-type Pokémon and using a limited evolutionary stone. The Pikachu trade offered slightly more value, as Pikachu never appeared in the Hoenn region's wild encounters. Players who wanted the franchise mascot on their team needed to either complete this trade or wait until Fire Red and Leaf Green released, allowing Pikachu transfers through trading or time-intensive breeding. The Slykoth trade provided access to one of the most unique Pokémon in the game, earlier than normal, wild encounters permitted, though Slykoth's truant ability made it challenging to use effectively in battle. If you're still awake halfway through, maybe subscribe before you drift off and tell me what time it is where you're watching from. The scarcity of in-game trades reflected a broader design philosophy in Ruby and Sapphire that emphasized exploration and discovery over guided exchanges. Rather than hand player specific Pokémon through trades, the developers filled Hoenn with diverse habitats containing different species, encouraging trainers to search thoroughly rather than rely on NPC generosity. This approach made finding rare Pokémon feel more rewarding, as players discovered them through their own exploration efforts rather than following trade instructions. Another curious element hidden in Ruby and Sapphire's code was a sprite that had nothing to do with Pokémon at all. Deep in the game's unused graphics files sat a yellow character clearly from another game entirely, featuring a simple design and bright coloring that stood out among Pokémon sprites. This character originated from Mendel Palace, an old Nintendo Entertainment System puzzle game developed by Game Freak in 1989, more than a decade before Ruby and Sapphire's release. The sprite's purpose in Ruby and Sapphire's code remains unclear, though several theories have emerged from the data mining community. Some speculate it served as a placeholder during the early development, representing a generic NPC before proper character sprites were created. Others suggest it might have been a test graphic used to verify that sprite display systems functioned correctly. A third possibility is that it represented an inside joke among the development team, a nostalgic callback to Game Freak's origins before they became synonymous with Pokémon. Mendel Palace held significance for Game Freak as one of their earliest commercially released titles. The puzzle game involved flipping tiles to defeat enemies, creating patterns and strategies reminiscent of Sudoku or sliding block puzzles. While it never achieved massive commercial success, Mendel Palace established Game Freak as a legitimate game developer capable of creating polished, enjoyable titles. The sprite's presence in Ruby and Sapphire suggests that even as Game Freak worked on one of gaming's biggest franchises, they maintained affection for their earlier work. Unused graphics and leftover code from other projects appear relatively frequently in game development. Programmers often repurpose assets from previous games as temporary solutions, intending to replace them before release, but occasionally forgetting to remove them entirely. These remnants usually cause no problems, sitting dormant in unused portions of the cartridge's storage space, only discovered years later when dedicated fans examine game files with specialized tools. The Mendel Palace sprite falls into this category, a harmless leftover that became a curiosity for those who dug deep enough to find it. The practice of examining unused game data has revealed countless fascinating details across the Pokémon franchise. Beta Pokémon designs, removed features, altered maps, and leftover text from earlier development stages all provide windows into how games evolved during creation. Ruby and Sapphire's files contained numerous such elements, including early versions of Pokémon designs that changed before release, alternate color schemes for trainers and locations, and text strings suggesting features that never made it into the final game. Regional naming differences extended beyond just the Unova region, though that particular case remained the most dramatic. Other regions maintained more consistent naming conventions, but small variations appeared depending on language and localization choices. Kanto's name came from the real-world Kanto region of Japan, where Tokyo resides, making it familiar to Japanese players, while remaining exotic to international audiences. Johto similarly references the Kansai region, another real Japanese geographic area, maintaining the pattern of using actual locations as inspiration for fictional Pokémon regions. Hoenn, the setting for Ruby and Sapphire, took its name from the Kyushu region of Japan, though the connection is less obvious to international players. The English name Hoenn bears little resemblance to Kyushu, unlike how Kanto and Johto maintained clearer connections to their source materials. This naming choice reflected a gradual shift in localization philosophy, where international versions began prioritizing names that sounded good in English over strict translations of Japanese geographic references. The trend continued, with Sinnoh, Unova, and subsequent regions, each taking increasing liberties with their naming conventions. Sinnoh's name came from the Hokkaido region, Japan's northernmost major island, known for its cold climate and winter sports. The Sinnoh region reflected this inspiration through its snowy roots, ice-type gym, and overall colder aesthetic compared to previous regions. The name itself underwent modification during localization, as Hokkaido didn't translate smoothly into English while maintaining the region's identity. Sinnoh preserved the northern, colder feel while creating a unique identity that worked across all language versions. Unova represented the most dramatic departure from Japanese geographic inspiration, instead basing itself on New York City and the surrounding American Northeast. This marked the first time a main series Pokémon region drew primary inspiration from a location outside Japan, reflecting the franchise's global reach and desire to create experiences that resonated with international audiences. The decision to set a Pokémon region in a fictionalized America created both opportunities and challenges for the development team, who needed to capture American aesthetics while maintaining the series' essential Pokémon identity. The cultural shift in Unova manifested in numerous ways beyond just geography and architecture. The region featured more diverse character designs, reflecting America's multicultural population, included landmarks inspired by real New York locations like the Brooklyn Bridge and Central Park, and even incorporated American sports culture through Nimbasa City's sports stadiums. These elements created a region that felt distinctly different from previous games, while still delivering the core Pokémon experience fans expected. Game Freak's storytelling ambitions in Black and White extended beyond just N and Team Plasma. The games explored themes of progress versus tradition, the ethics of human Pokémon relationships, and the consequences of pursuing ideals without considering practical realities. These mature themes elevated the narrative above typical defeat the evil team plots that had defined previous generations. Players found themselves questioning their actions and motivations, creating emotional investment in the story's outcome. The year and a half devoted to story development allowed Game Freak to craft nuanced character arcs and meaningful plot progression. Early towns and routes established the world and its conflicts naturally, avoiding the information dumps that plagued some earlier games' storytelling attempts. Characters reappeared throughout the journey, their relationships developing and changing based on events. The story built toward its climax methodically, with revelations and twists that felt earned rather than arbitrary. N's character received particular attention during development. His ability to hear Pokemon's voices, his isolated childhood raised by Ghetsis, and his genuine belief that separating humans and Pokemon would create a better world all combined to create a sympathetic antagonist. Players could understand his perspective even while disagreeing with his conclusions. These conversations with N throughout the game challenged players to articulate their own reasons for becoming Pokemon trainers, forcing introspection that previous games never demanded. Team Plasma's dual nature with some members genuinely believing in their liberation message, while others simply used it as cover for criminal activities, added further complexity. This split within the villainous organization reflected real-world movements, where noble goals become corrupted by those seeking power rather than genuine change. The revelation that Getsus manipulated N and the entire Team Plasma ideology for personal gain created one of the franchise's most effective villain reveals. The game's ending, where players catch one legendary dragon while N catches the other, forcing a battle between equally matched forces, provided a climactic confrontation that felt appropriately epic. Unlike previous games, where legendary Pokémon served as post-game bonuses or optional encounters, Black and White integrated Reshiram and Zekrom directly into the main story, making them essential to resolving the central conflict. This decision elevated the legendary Pokémon from mere collectibles to important narrative elements. The post-game content in Black and White, while less extensive than some previous titles, still offered significant additional gameplay. Players could challenge Cynthia, the former champion from Sinnoh, in a high-level battle that tested their team's strength. The ability to visit old characters and explore areas that opened only after becoming champion provided incentive to continue playing beyond the main story. These elements, combined with the competitive online battle systems, kept players engaged long after defeating the Elite Four. The emphasis on storytelling in Black and White influenced subsequent Pokémon games, with later generations incorporating increasingly complex narratives. Sun and Moon explored themes of family, belonging, and environmental conservation through Lily's story arc and the Aether Foundation plot. Sword and Shield, despite criticism for other elements, attempted to integrate the Dynamax phenomenon into both gameplay and narrative. The storytelling ambitions first fully realized in Black and White became an expected element of new Pokémon generations rather than a novel experiment. Design discussions during Ruby and Sapphire's development revealed how thoroughly Game Freak examined even fundamental mechanics. The consideration of changing move slots and party size demonstrated a willingness to question established norms, even if the team ultimately decided against alterations. This experimental mindset appeared throughout the third generation, which introduced numerous mechanical changes that shaped the franchise's future direction. The introduction of abilities in Ruby and Sapphire represented one of the most significant mechanical additions to the series. These passive effects gave each Pokémon unique characteristics that influenced battle strategy beyond just stats and moves. An ability like Intimidate lowered opposing Pokémon's attack stats when switching in, creating strategic switching opportunities. Abilities like Levitate provided immunity to ground-type moves, effectively adding a third type to certain Pokémon. The system added depth to team building and battle planning, making Pokémon selection more nuanced. Natures, another Ruby and Sapphire innovation, introduced personality-based stat modifications that made individual Pokémon more distinct from each other. Two Pokémon of the same species might perform differently in battle based on their natures, with one excelling at physical attacks while another specialized in special moves. This system added depth to the breeding and training process, as competitive players sought Pokémon with the optimal nature stat combinations. The 25 different natures provided enough variety to create meaningful differences without becoming overwhelmingly complex. The physical special split that would come in Diamond and Pearl built upon foundations laid in Ruby and Sapphire. The third generation's introduction of abilities and natures showed that the core battle system could evolve while maintaining its essential strategic elements. Each mechanical addition needed to enhance rather than complicate the experience, adding depth that rewarded mastery without creating barriers for casual players. Game Freak's careful approach to innovation ensured that new mechanics integrated smoothly rather than disrupting the series' established appeal. The decision to remove "Gotta Catch 'em All" as a marketing slogan reflected not just technical limitations, but also a subtle shift in how Game Freak wanted players to engage with Pokémon. Earlier generations emphasized collection as the primary goal, with completing the Pokédex serving as the ultimate achievement. Ruby and Sapphire, unable to provide a truly complete Pokédex at launch, needed a different approach to avoid disappointing players who expected to catch everything. This shift coincided with an increased emphasis on battling and strategic depth. The addition of abilities and natures made competitive battling more complex and engaging, attracting players who cared more about raising powerful teams than completing collections. The contest system, unique to the third generation, provided an alternative progression path focused on Pokémon beauty, cuteness, coolness, smartness, and toughness rather than battle prowess. These alternative goals created space for different playstyles beyond simple collection. The temporary impossibility of completing the National Pokédex actually created interesting player behavior. Fans became more accepting of using whatever Pokémon they could access, rather than waiting for specific favorites from previous generations. This forced experimentation led many players to discover Hoenn Pokémon they might have otherwise ignored in favor of established favorites. The limited selection created organic discovery as players explored team combinations using only Generation 3 species. The eventual solution to the Generation 3 gap, while complex, demonstrated Game Freak's commitment to maintaining the franchise's core promise. The ability to transfer Pokémon forward through generations became one of the series' defining features, with fans expecting each new game to maintain compatibility with previous titles. The technical challenges of creating transfer systems across different hardware platforms were substantial, but the developers recognized the importance of preserving players' emotional connections to their teams. Fire Red and Leaf Green's role in this solution served multiple purposes. The remakes introduced the original 151 Pokémon to a new generation of players who hadn't experienced Red and Blue, while simultaneously providing older fans a way to obtain those species using modern mechanics. The games incorporated abilities, natures, and other Generation 3 features, making transferred Kanto Pokémon fully compatible with Ruby and Sapphire. This approach to remakes became a template for future revisits to older regions, with Heart Gold and Soul Silver following a similar path years later. The GameCube titles, Colosseum and XD, filled additional gaps in the National Pokédex by offering Pokémon unavailable in the Game Boy Advance games. These console titles provided a different Pokémon experience, focusing heavily on double battles and shadow Pokémon mechanics, while serving the practical purpose of distributing otherwise unobtainable species. Players who owned GameCubes and Game Boy Advances could transfer Pokémon from the console games to their handheld cartridges, gradually building more complete collections. Event distributions played a crucial role in completing Generation 3 Pokédexes. Mythical Pokémon like Jirachi, Deoxys, and certain legendary Pokémon appeared only through limited-time events or special distributions. These events required players to visit specific retailers, attend Pokémon-related gatherings, or participate in time-limited promotions. The exclusivity of these distributions created collectible value, but frustrated completionists who lacked access to events due to geographic or timing constraints. The complexity of completing a Generation 3 Pokédex created a hierarchy of dedication among fans. Casual players enjoyed the main story and perhaps caught most Hoenn Pokémon, without worrying about obtaining every species. Dedicated fans sought out additional games and trading opportunities to expand their collections. Hardcore completionists coordinated with other players, attended events, and spent years gradually accumulating every Pokémon across multiple cartridges and platforms. This range of engagement levels allowed the games to satisfy different player motivations without requiring everyone to pursue 100% completion. The 3 in-game trades in Ruby and Sapphire, while limited in number, each told small stories about the NPCs involved. The trainer offering a Slukoth for a Makuhita explained they preferred lazy Pokémon over fighting types, creating a character moment through the trade itself. The Pikachu trade came from a young girl who wanted a cute Pokémon, making the exchange feel like connecting 2 different player types, those who prioritized cuteness and those who focused on battling. The Corsola trade involved a sailor who preferred water types matching his profession and lifestyle. These characterization touches, subtle though they were, added personality to the game world. NPCs weren't just generic trade partners, but individuals with preferences and motivations. The trades made sense within the context of each character's stated interests, even if they offered questionable value from a gameplay perspective. This attention to minor details helped Hoenn feel more like a living region inhabited by real people rather than just a gameplay space filled with mechanical functions. The poor value of most Generation 3 trades might have been intentional design, encouraging players to catch Pokémon themselves rather than relying on trades for rare species. By making the trades offer common or easily obtainable Pokémon, Game Freak pushed players toward exploration and discovery. The Pikachu trade served as the exception, providing genuine value by offering the only Pikachu available in Hoenn without trading from other games. This single, genuinely useful trade stood out precisely because the others offered so little, making the Pikachu feel like a special reward. The philosophical approach to trades shifted somewhat in later generations, with Diamond and Pearl, including more valuable exchanges and some NPCs offering Pokémon with special moves or abilities. This evolution reflected changing attitudes toward convenience and player time investment. Early Pokémon games expected players to spend significant time trading with friends or making multiple trips to specific locations. Later titles, recognizing that many players had limited time and social opportunities for trading, made more rare Pokémon available through in-game methods. The Mendel Palace sprite, hidden in Ruby and Sapphire's code, represented just one of many unusual discoveries fans made through data mining. As tools for examining game files became more sophisticated, dedicated communities uncovered remarkable amounts of unused content across every Pokémon generation. These discoveries ranged from minor curiosities like sprite tests to major revelations about cut features and abandoned designs. Each finding provided insight into the development process and the decisions that shaped final releases. Beta Pokémon designs appeared frequently in unused file sections, showing earlier versions of familiar species. Some designs changed dramatically during development, with only traces of their original concepts surviving in final forms. Others remained largely intact, but featured different colors, proportions, or details that shifted before release. Examining these beta designs revealed how iterative the creation process was, with creatures going through multiple revisions before reaching their final states. Removed features occasionally left traces in game code, suggesting mechanics that were planned but ultimately cut. Ruby and Sapphire's files contained references to systems that never appeared in the released games, including what appeared to be early versions of features that would debut in later generations. These remnants sparked speculation about what might have been, though without developer commentary. Most theories remained educated guesses rather than confirmed facts. The presence of test graphics and debugging tools in game files demonstrated the technical infrastructure used during Amusene's development. Programmers needed ways to verify that graphics displayed correctly, that data structures functioned properly, and that the countless systems comprising a Pokémon game worked together without conflicts. Test assets served these purposes during development, ideally being removed before release, but occasionally surviving in unused file sections. The Mendel Palace sprite likely served such a testing function before being forgotten. Data mining communities approached these discoveries with varying philosophies. Some treated them purely as technical curiosities, interesting primarily for what they revealed about game development processes. Others viewed them as lost treasures, alternate possibilities that deserved recognition alongside official content. Still others focused on practical applications, using knowledge of unused mechanics to find glitches or exploits in released games. These different approaches coexisted within fan communities, each contributing to broader understanding of the games. The ethical considerations around data mining and sharing unused content generated occasional debate within Pokémon communities. Some argued that examining commercial game files violated developer intent and potentially revealed proprietary information. Others countered that purchased cartridges became their owner's property, making file examination a legitimate form of appreciation and study. Most communities settled on norms that allowed discussing findings while respecting developers' rights to keep certain information private, such as not distributing copyrighted assets or using discoveries to create unauthorized commercial products. Game Freak's response to data mining discoveries remained generally neutral. Unlike some companies that aggressively opposed examination of game files, Game Freak rarely issued takedown notices or public statements about fan discoveries. This hands-off approach allowed communities to flourish and created goodwill among dedicated fans who appreciated the freedom to explore games they loved. The occasional nods to fan discoveries in later games suggested developers were aware of and perhaps amused by the intense scrutiny their work received. The value of preserving gaming history through projects like data mining and archiving grew increasingly apparent as older hardware aged. Cartridge batteries died, taking save files with them. Original hardware broke down, making vintage games unplayable without emulation or reproduction cartridges. Official sources didn't always maintain complete records of development processes or design decisions. Fan-driven preservation efforts filled these gaps, ensuring that knowledge about gaming history survived for future generations. Ruby and Sapphire's position in Pokémon history remained significant not just for their innovations, but for the challenges they overcame. The Generation 3 games navigated hardware transitions, introduced mechanical depth that defined future competitive battling, and maintained the franchise's appeal during a period when many gaming series struggled to evolve successfully. The temporary break in backward compatibility, while controversial, ultimately led to improved transfer systems in later generations as Game Freak learned from the experience. The naming variations for regions across different languages continued in generations following Unova, though never quite as dramatically. Kalos, based on France, maintained its name across most language versions with only minor pronunciation differences. Alola, inspired by Hawaii, similarly kept consistent naming since the Hawaiian influences worked well in all markets. Galar, drawing from the United Kingdom, preserved its name while incorporating British cultural references that international players could recognize and appreciate. This trend toward more universal naming conventions reflected Pokemon's evolution as a truly global franchise. Rather than creating regions, primarily for Japanese audiences, with international versions adapting them afterward, Game Freak increasingly designed regions with worldwide appeal from the beginning. Character names, location names, and cultural references became more diverse, ensuring that players from different countries could find familiar elements alongside exotic discoveries. This approach broadened the series' appeal while maintaining the essential qualities that made Pokémon special. The cultural influences in each region added layers of meaning for players familiar with the source material while remaining accessible to those who weren't. A player who had never visited France could still enjoy Kalos, appreciating its artistic aesthetics and elegant architecture without recognizing every specific reference. Someone familiar with French culture gained additional enjoyment from spotting subtle nods to real locations, historical events, and cultural touchstones. This dual-level design became a hallmark of modern Pokémon regions, rewarding knowledge without requiring it. The decision to base Unova on America rather than a Japanese location marked a turning point in the franchise's internationalization. Game Freak acknowledged that Pokémon belonged to worldwide audiences as much as Japanese fans, deserving content that spoke to global experiences. The success of Black and White demonstrated that Pokémon could maintain its identity while exploring new cultural contexts, paving the way for future regions that drew from various parts of the world. The thematic connections in the Unova starter Pokémon went deeper than just surface-level design. Snivy's French Empire influence extended to its personality, which reflected aristocratic haughtiness and superiority. The grass snake looked down on others, considering itself above common concerns. This attitude matched historical French aristocratic reputation, for better or worse, creating a Pokémon whose character reflected its cultural inspiration. Players who chose Snivy often embraced this personality, playing along with the starter's prideful nature. Tepig's connection to Chinese martial culture informed not just Embor's design, but its battle style. The firefighting type utilized techniques resembling Chinese martial arts, with powerful strikes and defensive stances that reflected centuries of combat tradition. The choice to make Embor bulkier than previous firefighting starters distinguished it from Blaziken's speed-focused build and Infernape's mixed attacking style. Embor became a tank, absorbing hits while delivering powerful counterattacks, much like certain Chinese martial arts emphasized. Samurot's transformation from cute otter to serious warrior created the most dramatic shift among the three starters. Oshawott playful personality gave way to Samurot's stern discipline, reflecting the rigid training Samurai underwent. The shift from bipedal to quadrupedal stance surprised many players, as most starter Pokémon maintained consistent body structures through their evolution lines. This radical change emphasized Samurot's complete transformation into something different from what it began as, much like samurai training fundamentally changed young warriors. The cultural depth in Black and White's starters set a precedent for future generations to incorporate meaningful inspirations beyond simple type combinations. Later starters drew from various sources, each bringing unique cultural elements to their designs. Chespin's French Knight influences, Litton's wrestling inspiration, and Grookey's musical connections all demonstrated how starters could serve as ambassadors for their region's themes while remaining appealing to players of all ages. The storytelling investment in Black and White paid dividends not just in critical praise, but in fan engagement. Players discussed the game's moral questions long after completing it, debating whether N was right, whether Team Plasma's goals justified their methods, and what the correct relationship between humans and Pokémon should be. These discussions elevated Pokémon discourse beyond simple gameplay strategies and collectible lists, treating the games as narratives worth serious analysis. The year and a half devoted to story development allowed Game Freak to avoid common pitfalls that plagued game narratives. Plot holes diminished as writers had time to ensure story elements connected logically. Character arcs developed naturally rather than feeling rushed or forced. Thematic elements wove throughout the experience rather than appearing arbitrarily in isolated moments. The quality difference between Black and White's narrative and earlier games' stories demonstrated what could be achieved with appropriate time and resources. N's design as a character benefited from this extended development. His green hair, unusual clothing, and distinctive mannerisms made him visually memorable, while his dialogue revealed a complex psychology shaped by his unusual upbringing. The revelation that Ghetsis had deliberately shown N only abused and mistreated Pokémon to shape his worldview added layers to his character, making him both sympathetic victim and misguided antagonist. This duality created emotional complexity rare in Pokémon villains. The Team Plasma split, with some members genuinely believing in liberation while others served Ghetsis' ambitions, reflected real-world ideological movements. Well-meaning individuals often join organizations whose leadership has corrupt motivations, a pattern visible throughout history and current events. By including this reality in Team Plasma's structure, Game Freak created a villain team that felt more authentic than previous generations' generally uniformly evil organizations. The post-game content, showing some former Plasma members trying to atone for their actions while others remained defiant, added further depth. The legendary Pokémon integration into Black and White's story represented another narrative innovation. Rather than saving legendary encounters for post-game side quests, the game made Reshiram and Zekrom central to resolving the main conflict. This decision gave the legendary Pokémon narrative weight they rarely received, transforming them from optional bonuses into essential story elements. The player's relationship with their legendary dragon paralleled N's bond with the opposite dragon, creating symmetry that emphasized the truth versus ideals theme. The battle between the player and N, each commanding a legendary dragon, provided a climactic encounter that felt appropriately epic. Equal power levels meant the battle hinged on strategy rather than simple type advantage, requiring players to use their entire team effectively. The dramatic presentation, with the legendary Pokémon appearing at key story moments and cutscenes showing their power, built toward this confrontation in ways previous games' legendary encounters never achieved. Black and White's influence on subsequent generations appeared in how later games approached storytelling. Sun and Moon built their narrative around Lily's character arc and family drama, creating emotional investment through character relationships rather than just world-ending threats. Sword and Shield integrated the gym challenge into the region's culture, making athletic competition a central cultural element rather than just a gameplay system. These narrative approaches built on foundations Black and White established, showing that Pokémon games could deliver meaningful stories alongside traditional gameplay. The consideration of changing core battle mechanics during Ruby and Sapphire's development revealed Game Freak's willingness to fundamentally reconsider established systems. The 4-move limitation had existed since the franchise's inception, a constraint born partly from Game Boy hardware limitations and partly from design philosophy. By the time Ruby and Sapphire entered development, the Game Boy Advance's superior hardware could easily accommodate more moves per Pokémon if developers chose to implement such a change. The discussion likely centered on whether additional move slots would enhance or complicate the battle system. 4 moves created meaningful choices, forcing players to prioritize coverage, power, utility, and type advantage. Adding more slots might reduce these strategic decisions' importance, as Pokémon could carry more options simultaneously. The constraint generated interesting team-building questions. Should this Pokémon carry a status move or another attacking option? Does this particular coverage move justify giving up a stronger, same-type attack? These questions disappeared if Pokémon could simply learn everything useful. The party-size discussion probably followed similar logic. 6 Pokémon provided enough variety for interesting team composition while remaining manageable during battles and menu navigation. 8 or 10 Pokémon might offer more options, but would overwhelm players with choices and extend battles to tedious lengths. The interface challenges alone would be substantial, as fitting more Pokémon information on screen required either shrinking displays or creating additional menu layers. The team ultimately decided that 6 remained optimal. These discussions never reached the implementation phase, suggesting the team reached consensus relatively quickly that maintaining established limits served the game better than changing them. The decision demonstrated mature design thinking, recognizing that not every possible change improved the experience. Sometimes preserving constraints that forced interesting decisions mattered more than adding options that diluted strategic focus. This design philosophy extended to other aspects of Pokémon, with Game Freak carefully evaluating which mechanics to evolve and which to preserve. The 4 move limits preservation meant that moveset design remained crucial for Pokémon competitive viability. A species with excellent stats but poor move selection struggled against better balanced Pokémon. Conversely, Pokémon with modest stats but perfect move pools could surprise opponents through unexpected coverage or utility. This balance between stats and moves created depth that wouldn't exist if Pokémon could simply learn every useful move simultaneously. Competitive players spent considerable time optimizing movesets, calculating which combinations provided best coverage against common threats while maintaining offensive or defensive presence. The rise of competitive Pokémon communities and organized tournaments demonstrated the depth possible within the 4-move framework. Players discovered subtle interactions between moves, abilities, and held items that created strategies Game Freak likely never anticipated. The constraints forced creativity that might not have emerged with looser limitations. The party size limitation similarly shaped how players built teams. 6 Pokémon meant covering all 18 types remained impossible, requiring players to prioritize certain types while accepting vulnerabilities to others. This created natural team weaknesses that made predicting opponents' strategies important. A team weak to fire types needed plans for handling fire opponents, whether through strategic switching, bulky walls that could take fire attacks, or surprisingly fast Pokémon that could eliminate fire threats before they attacked. The 6 Pokémon limit also made individual team members important, as losing one meant giving up roughly 17% of the team's offensive or defensive capabilities. This made protecting team members during battle crucial, as careless play that got Pokémon knocked out reduced strategic options for the rest of the battle. The weight given to each team member created attachment, as players built relationships with the 6 Pokémon they carried, rather than treating their team as interchangeable parts of a larger roster. The decision to remove "gotta catch 'em all" as marketing language while maintaining it as an implicit goal reflected nuanced thinking about player expectations. Game Freak recognized that using this slogan when completing the Pokédex was temporarily impossible would frustrate fans, but they still wanted players to collect Pokémon and work toward complete collections. The solution was de-emphasizing collection as the primary goal while building systems that rewarded it. The Pokédex itself provided intrinsic rewards for catching Pokémon, offering information about species, tracking progress, and giving players concrete goals. The thrill of seeing a blank entry fill with data after catching a new species remained satisfying regardless of marketing language. Players who enjoyed collection continued pursuing it without needing slogans encouraging them. The passionate collectors completed their Pokédexes despite the enormous difficulty, while casual players caught whatever appealed to them without worrying about completion. This approach acknowledged different player motivations and engagement levels. Some fans loved collecting every species and worked tirelessly toward 100% completion. Others focused on building strong battle teams and cared little about filling Pokédex entries. Still others played primarily for story experiences, catching only Pokémon necessary for progressing through the game. By removing "gotta catch 'em all" from prominent marketing, Game Freak made space for these diverse playstyles rather than implicitly judging players who didn't pursue completion. The phrase, "gotta catch 'em all," eventually returned to Pokémon marketing as backward compatibility improved and completing the national Pokédex became more feasible. The slogan's absence during Generation 3 represented a temporary adjustment rather than permanent abandonment. This flexibility demonstrated Game Freak's willingness to adapt messaging to current realities rather than rigidly adhering to historical branding regardless of circumstances. The complexity of completing a Generation 3 national Pokédex created communities dedicated to helping players achieve this goal. Trading forums emerged where players coordinated exchanges, helping each other obtain version-exclusive Pokémon in hard-to-find species. Event Pokémon became valuable trading commodities, with players who attended distributions able to trade duplicates to those who couldn't. These communities fostered cooperation and social connection, transforming Pokédex completion from a solitary achievement into a collaborative effort. The trading communities developed their own cultures, norms, and trust systems. Reputation mattered, as players who completed trades fairly and honestly earned good standing, while scammers who stole Pokémon during trades faced community exile. Moderators developed systems for verifying event Pokémon authenticity, as hacked or cloned Pokémon diminished the value of legitimate distributions. These communities demonstrated how game systems created emergent social structures beyond what developers explicitly designed. The enduring appeal of completing Pokédexes decades after Generation 3's release speaks to the satisfaction collection provides. Players who finally obtain every species after years of effort experience genuine achievement, having overcome substantial obstacles through persistence and coordination. The difficulty makes the accomplishment meaningful, distinguishing it from easier goals that anyone can reach. This sense of earned achievement motivated collectors through countless hours of trading, breeding, and transferring. The Generation 3 gap's eventual resolution through Fire Red, Leaf Green, Emerald, and the GameCube titles demonstrated Game Freak's commitment to solving problems they created. Rather than accepting that some Pokémon would remain permanently inaccessible, they developed multiple solutions that gradually filled gaps in the national Pokédex. This problem-solving approach characterized Game Freak's development philosophy. Identify issues, brainstorm solutions, implement fixes even if they required significant resources. The minimal in-game trades in Ruby and Sapphire reflected broader design philosophy favoring player agency and exploration. Rather than guiding players through specific trades, the game trusted them to discover Pokémon independently. This approach respected player intelligence and curiosity, assuming they would explore thoroughly, rather than needing explicit direction toward every rare species. The philosophy aligned with Ruby and Sapphire's overall emphasis on discovery and adventure. Hoen's design encouraged exploration through its varied environments and numerous optional areas. Secret bases allowed players to create personal spaces in the world, customizing them with furniture and decorations. The diving mechanic opened the underwater routes that players could explore, finding items and Pokémon unavailable on the surface. These features rewarded thorough exploration beyond just rare Pokémon encounters, creating multiple reasons to investigate every corner of the region. The contest system added another dimension to Hoenn, providing goals unrelated to battling. Players could raise Pokémon specifically for contests, optimizing their conditions through careful Pokéblock feeding rather than training for combat. This alternative progression path appealed to players who enjoyed Pokémon aesthetics and personality more than battle strategy, creating space for different engagement styles within the same game. The contest system added another dimension to Hoenn, providing goals unrelated to battling. Players could raise Pokémon specifically for contests, optimizing their conditions through careful Pokéblock feeding rather than training for combat. This alternative progression path appealed to players who enjoyed Pokémon aesthetics and personality more than battle strategy, creating space for different engagement styles within the same game. The Pokéblock system itself introduced mechanics borrowed from rhythm and timing games. Players blended berries, using the berry blender, spinning the mechanism while timing button presses to create high-quality Pokéblocks. Better timing produced better blocks, which raised Pokémon conditions more effectively. This minigame added variety to the gameplay loop, breaking up the standard cycle of battling and exploring with something completely different. Contest categories matched the 5 Pokémon conditions: coolness, beauty, cuteness, smartness, and toughness. Each category attracted different types of Pokémon and required different strategies to win. Cool contests favored tough-looking Pokémon with aggressive move animations, while cute contests rewarded adorable species performing charming moves. This variety meant nearly any Pokémon could excel in some contest category, even species considered weak in battle. The contest appeal system, where move order and combinations generated bonus points, created strategic depth that paralleled battle tactics. Players needed to understand which moves created excitement, matched judge preferences, or built toward impressive combinations. This system rewarded planning and knowledge similar to competitive battling, but with completely different optimal strategies. A Pokémon built for contest success might carry moves it would never use in combat, prioritizing visual appeal and condition requirements over damage output. Contest rankings progressed from normal to super to hyper to master, increasing in difficulty as more skilled opponents appeared. Early contests allowed experimentation with different strategies and Pokémon, while Master Rank required optimized condition stats and carefully planned move sequences. This progression structure mirrored gym battles' escalating challenge, providing satisfying advancement for contest-focused players. The ribbons earned from winning contests served as alternative achievements to gym badges, decorating Pokémon summaries with colorful symbols representing their accomplishments. Players could feel pride in their contest champions, just as they did with battle teams, building emotional connections through different types of achievement. Some players preferred contest ribbons to battle victories, finding the aesthetic competition more enjoyable than combat-focused gameplay. The diving mechanic, introduced in Ruby and Sapphire, opened entirely new areas to explore beneath Hoenn's numerous water routes. Players could descend underwater, exploring submerged caves, finding hidden items, and encountering Pokémon that never appeared on the surface. This vertical dimension added complexity to the region's geography, making water routes more interesting than simple paths between land areas. Underwater environments featured unique visual aesthetics with filtered lighting and plant life, creating distinct atmospheres. The muted colors and slower movement created calm, exploratory moods that contrasted with the faster-paced surface world. Players who took time to thoroughly explore underwater areas discovered rewards that those who simply surfed past missed entirely. This design encouraged thoroughness while making exploration feel organic rather than checklist-driven. The sealed chamber puzzle, accessible only through diving, provided one of Generation 3's most cryptic challenges. Players needed to decipher Braille messages, an actual real-world writing system for blind individuals, to navigate the chamber and access the Regitrio's chambers. This puzzle elevated Ruby and Sapphire's secrets above typical video game hidden content, incorporating educational elements while creating genuinely challenging mysteries. The decision to use Braille, rather than inventing a fictional script, demonstrated Game Freak's willingness to incorporate real-world elements that most players wouldn't immediately recognize. Children who encountered the sealed chamber puzzle might research Braille to solve it, learning about an important accessibility tool in the process. This subtle educational component enriched the game beyond pure entertainment, exposing players to knowledge they might not have encountered otherwise. The Regitrio themselves represented ancient Pokémon sealed away in remote locations, accessible only to those who solved complex puzzles. Regirock, Regis, and Registeel each required specific steps to encounter, with cryptic Braille messages providing clues about necessary actions. Players needed to teach specific moves to certain Pokémon, position them precisely in their party, and perform seemingly arbitrary actions like using Dig in particular spots. These convoluted requirements created legendary encounters that felt truly legendary, hidden behind meaningful effort rather than simply blocking paths until players obtained certain items. The Regitrio's lore connected them to ancient history, with their sealed chambers suggesting they had been deliberately hidden rather than naturally dwelling in those locations. The mystery of who sealed them and why remained largely unexplained, allowing players to imagine backstories. This approach to legendary Pokémon lore created space for speculation and fan theories, with communities developing elaborate explanations for questions the games deliberately left unanswered. Secret bases represented another Ruby and Sapphire innovation that encouraged exploration and personal expression. Players could create bases in specific locations throughout Hoenn, decorating them with furniture and items obtained through gameplay. Each base became a personal space, reflecting the owner's aesthetic preferences and accomplishments. The ability to share bases through mixing records with other players added a social dimension, allowing friends to visit each other's creations. The secret base system rewarded exploration by placing potential base locations in hidden or hard-to-reach areas. Players who thoroughly investigated routes and caves discovered more base spots than those who simply followed the main path. This created incentive to explore beyond what story progression required, as finding a particularly cool base location felt like discovering a secret. The best spots offered unique features like waterfall views or secluded forest clearings, making them more desirable than generic cave spaces. Decorating secret bases allowed creative expression within Pokémon's typically structured gameplay. Players could arrange furniture in whatever configurations they preferred, creating themed bases or displaying rare decorations obtained from special events. The decoration system predated the more elaborate customization options that would appear in later generations, establishing that Pokémon games could incorporate personal expression alongside traditional gameplay systems. The record mixing feature that enabled secret base sharing also transferred other information between cartridges, including contest statistics, battle records, and berry growth data. This system created persistent connections between players even when not actively trading or battling. A player might mix records with a friend and later encounter their secret base team in battle, creating unexpected interactions. These organic connections made Hoenn feel more populated and alive than regions that existed solely in individual cartridges. Weather effects gained prominence in Ruby and Sapphire, both mechanically and aesthetically. Harsh sunlight, rain, sandstorms, and hail affected battle conditions, strengthening certain move types while weakening others. Weather-based strategies became viable in competitive play, with teams built around maximizing weather advantages. This mechanic added depth to team building, as weather considerations influenced which Pokémon synergized effectively. Route-specific weather created distinct atmospheres for different areas of Hoenn. The desert routes featured persistent sandstorms that damaged most Pokémon each turn, while certain water routes experienced rain that boosted water-type moves. These environmental conditions made locations feel unique and required players to adapt strategies based on where they battled. The regional weather patterns contributed to Hoenn's identity as a diverse region with varied climates. The cast form Pokémon exemplified Generation 3's weather focus as it changed forms based on current weather conditions. Sunny weather transformed it into a fire type, rain made it water type, and hail changed it to ice type. This unique mechanic made cast form interesting for weather teams, despite modest stats, as its versatility provided type coverage that adapted to circumstances. The form changes also demonstrated the technical possibilities of conditional appearance shifts, a concept later generations would expand significantly. The introduction of double battles in Generation 3 added strategic complexity by requiring players to consider how team members worked together simultaneously. Rather than sending out Pokémon one at a time, double battles placed two Pokémon on each side at once, enabling combination moves, protective strategies, and coordinated attacks. This format became standard for certain trainer battles and would eventually become the primary format for competitive Pokémon tournaments. Double battle strategy differed substantially from singles, as moves that hit multiple targets, abilities that affected allies, and positioning considerations all gained importance. Certain Pokémon that struggled in singles formats excelled in doubles due to support-oriented abilities or moves that benefited partners. This created additional team-building variety, as players needed different rosters for singles and doubles success. The Hoenn region's design encouraged backtracking and revisiting earlier areas with new abilities. Many routes contained sections accessible only after obtaining specific hidden machines, rewarding players who returned to explore thoroughly. This design philosophy created satisfying discovery moments when players realized that an area they had passed before contained hidden secrets now accessible. The interconnected geography made Hoenn feel like a cohesive region rather than a linear path. The day and night cycle that had featured prominently in Gold and Silver was notably absent from Ruby and Sapphire. This removal came from technical constraints, as the real-time clock implementation on Game Boy Advance cartridges proved problematic. The infamous berry glitch that broke the in-game clock stemmed from issues with how the time-tracking system interacted with save data. Rather than risk similar problems affecting day/night transitions, Game Freak opted to maintain a constant time of day throughout gameplay. This decision had gameplay implications, as certain time-based evolutions, like Eevee's transformations into Espeon and Umbreon, couldn't occur in Ruby and Sapphire. Players needed to transfer Eevee to Colosseum or wait for Fire Red and Leaf Green, which restored the day-night cycle, to obtain these evolutions. The missing time system represented one of the generation's few steps backward from previous games, though understandable given the technical challenges involved. The eventual restoration of time-based mechanics in Fire Red and Leaf Green came with improvements over Gold and Silver's implementation. The new system proved more stable and less prone to the glitches that plagued earlier attempts. This demonstrated Game Freak's commitment to learning from past problems and implementing better solutions rather than abandoning features entirely when initial attempts faltered. The Hoenn Pokémon designs reflected the region's tropical setting and diverse environments. Water and bug types appeared more frequently than in previous regions, matching the abundance of coastline and jungle areas. Many Hoenn species drew inspiration from marine life, with Clamperl evolving into either Huntail or Gorbis depending on which held item it was traded with, demonstrating evolution's role in deep-sea adaptation. The split evolution concept appeared multiple times in Generation 3, with Wurmple branching into either Silcoon or Cascoon, which further evolved into Beautifully or Dustox. Unlike most branching evolutions, where player choice determined the outcome, Wurmple's evolution path was set by a hidden personality value when it was generated. This randomness frustrated players who wanted specific evolutions, as they couldn't influence the outcome through any gameplay action. The inability to control Wurmple's evolution created interesting situations where players might catch dozens of them, hoping to find one with the desired hidden value. This mechanic added unpredictability to team building, as players couldn't guarantee obtaining their preferred butterfly or moth. The random element made finally getting the desired evolution more satisfying, though it also frustrated completionists who needed both forms for Pokédex completion. Other branching evolutions in Generation 3 offered more player control. Kirlia could evolve into either Gardevoir through leveling or Gallade through using a Dawnstone on male individuals, a mechanic that wouldn't be introduced until Generation 4. Snorunt evolved into either Glalie through leveling or Froslass through using a Dawnstone on females. These gender-specific evolution paths added another consideration to team planning, as catching specific genders became important for obtaining certain evolutionary forms. The physical special split that would come in Generation 4 had significant implications for Generation 3 Pokémon when those games released. Many species that seemed poorly designed in Generation 3 suddenly became viable once their move types aligned better with their stats. This retroactive improvement demonstrated how mechanical changes could breathe new life into older designs, making Pokémon collections more valuable as previously mediocre team members gained competitive viability. The ability system introduced in Ruby and Sapphire created numerous strategic considerations that hadn't existed in previous generations. Abilities like Wonder Guard, which made Shedinja immune to all attacks except super effective ones, fundamentally changed how that Pokémon functioned. Other abilities provided weather immunities, boosted certain move types, or triggered effects when switching into battle. These passive abilities added depth without complicating the interface, as they activated automatically rather than requiring player input. Hidden abilities, though not introduced until Generation 5, would later provide even more options for customization. The concept that Pokémon could have different abilities of the same species added another layer to breeding and collecting, as players sought specimens with optimal ability combinations. This system, built on the foundation Ruby and Sapphire established, demonstrating how initial innovations could be expanded in future generations. The nature system similarly added depth through simple implementation. 25 different natures provided enough variety that two Pokémon of the same species could perform quite differently, while not being so numerous that remembering them all became impossible. The system tied personality to mechanical benefits, creating narrative justification for stat variations. And adamant, Pokémon made sense as having higher attack and lower special attack, as its stubborn nature implied it preferred physical combat to special. Techniques, breeding mechanics gained importance in Generation 3, as competitive players sought Pokémon with optimal nature stat combinations. The ability to pass down natures through held items like Everstone made breeding less random, though still requiring significant time investment. This created endgame content for players who enjoyed optimization and team building, providing goals beyond simply completing the story. The introduction of effort values, though hidden in the games, created another optimization system that competitive players embraced. Training Pokémon against specific species granted invisible points that boosted certain stats upon leveling up. Knowledgeable players could maximize their Pokémon's potential through deliberate effort value training, creating stronger teams than those who didn't understand the system. This hidden complexity allowed casual and competitive players to coexist, with the former enjoying games without worrying about these details, while the latter dove deep into optimization. The berry system expanded in Ruby and Sapphire, introducing numerous new berry types with various battle and growth effects. Players could plant berries in soil patches throughout Hoenn, waiting for them to grow before harvesting. This simple farming mechanic added a secondary progression system that rewarded patience and planning. Certain berries took longer to grow, but provided more valuable effects, creating decisions about which varieties to cultivate. The berry blending system for creating Pokéblocks added another use for harvested berries, ensuring none went to waste. Players who didn't care about contests could still use their berries for battle-oriented Pokéblocks or trade them to NPCs for useful items. This flexibility in resource usage meant different playstyles could all find value in the berry system without forcing anyone to engage with aspects they found uninteresting. The Trick House provided recurring challenges throughout the player's journey through Hoenn. Each visit presented a new puzzle requiring specific items or abilities to solve, with rewards growing more valuable as challenges became harder. This optional content rewarded players who revisited earlier areas, creating incentive to return even after story progression moved them forward. The Trick House Master's enthusiasm and quirky personality made these challenges feel lighthearted rather than tedious tests. The Battle Frontier, introduced in Emerald, represented Generation 3's peak post-game content. 7 different battle facilities each tested different skills and strategies, from singles battles to rental Pokémon challenges to team coordination tests. The Frontier required mastery of mechanics beyond what story progression demanded, creating substantial in-game content for dedicated players. Earning all 7 gold symbols represented one of the franchise's most challenging accomplishments, requiring hundreds of consecutive victories across various formats. The Battle Tower specifically tested players' team-building skills and strategic execution, pitting them against increasingly difficult computer-controlled opponents. Unlike the story mode, where overleveling could overcome poor strategy, the Battle Tower placed strict level caps that ensured success required genuine skill. Consecutive victories became harder as opponents' Pokémon improved, forcing players to adapt strategies and account for diverse threats. The Battle Factory randomized which Pokemon players used, testing their ability to build functional teams from limited options. Players needed to understand different Pokemon's strengths and weaknesses instantly, making strategic decisions without the familiarity that came from using the same team repeatedly. This format rewarded broad game knowledge over specialized expertise with specific species. The Battle Pike challenged players' luck and risk assessment, presenting branching paths where choices affected what challenges appeared. Some paths led to easy battles, while others triggered harsh status conditions or tough opponents. This element of chance meant even skilled players couldn't guarantee perfect runs, adding unpredictability that kept the pike interesting across multiple attempts. The Battle Pyramid had players navigate a dungeon with limited visibility and random wild encounters. Items scattered throughout provided advantages, but collecting them risked encountering more battles that damaged the team. This risk-reward balance created tension as players decided whether to explore thoroughly or rush toward the exit. The pyramid's maze-like structure meant different paths led to different challenges, adding variety across multiple runs. The Battle Dome organized tournaments where players competed in elimination brackets. Watching opponent battles before facing them provided the information for planning strategies, as observing their teams and tactics revealed weaknesses to exploit. This format emphasized preparation and adaptation, as players adjusted strategies between rounds based on upcoming opponents. The Battle Factory, Palace, and Arena each added unique twists to standard battles, testing different aspects of Pokemon mastery. The variety across all 7 facilities ensured that no single strategy dominated, as teams that excelled in one format might struggle in another. This encouraged players to maintain diverse rosters and understand multiple playstyles rather than perfecting a single approach. Emerald's expanded post-game content demonstrated Game Freak's understanding that dedicated players wanted substantial challenges after completing the story. The Battle Frontier kept players engaged for dozens or hundreds of additional hours, pursuing gold symbols and perfecting teams. This content respected players' time investment by providing appropriately difficult challenges rather than simply extending playtime through grinding or repetition. The inclusion of previous generation legendary Pokemon in Emerald created additional collection goals. Ho-Oh and Lugia, originally featured in Gold and Silver, became available through specific conditions, allowing players to complete more of the National Pokédex without needing GameCube titles. These additions made Emerald the definitive version of Generation 3 for completionists, as it provided access to species unavailable in Ruby or Sapphire alone. The clone glitch that existed in Emerald became famous among players who discovered it. By carefully timing save operations during trades, players could duplicate Pokemon, creating copies of rare or valuable species. While this glitch obviously violated intended gameplay, its existence became part of Generation 3's legacy. Game Freak patched the glitch in later production runs of Emerald cartridges, but early versions retained the duplication method. The ethical discussions around glitch exploitation divided Pokemon communities. Some players argued that single-player glitches harmed nobody and represented legitimate ways to interact with games they owned. Others contended that duplicating Pokemon cheapened the effort required to obtain rare species legitimately. Most communities settled on norms that allowed glitch discussion while requiring disclosure when trading potentially cloned Pokemon, ensuring recipients knew what they were receiving. The Pomeg glitch, another famous Emerald exploit, allowed access to areas and Pokemon that should have been impossible to reach. By manipulating Pokemon health values, Through Pomeg berry feeding, players could trigger glitches that broke normal gameplay boundaries. Speedrunners embraced these exploits to complete games faster, while casual players enjoyed breaking intended limitations to explore impossible areas. The persistence of glitches across Pokémon generations stems partly from the game's complexity. With hundreds of Pokémon, thousands of possible move combinations, and numerous interacting systems, thoroughly testing every possible scenario becomes essentially impossible. Glitches slip through quality assurance because testers can't anticipate every unusual action combination players might attempt. This reality means most games, especially complex ones, ship with undiscovered glitches that emerge only after millions of players explore every possibility. The community's attitude toward glitches evolved over time, with most players distinguishing between harmless exploits and serious game-breaking bugs. Glitches that allowed skipping tedious tasks or accessing content slightly earlier than intended were generally accepted, while exploits that corrupted save files or fundamentally broke game balance drew more criticism. This nuanced approach recognized that not all glitches affected gameplay equally, with some adding charm or speedrun potential, while others genuinely damaged the experience. Game Freak's response to glitch discoveries remained generally restrained compared to some developers. Rather than aggressively patching every discovered exploit or pursuing legal action against those who documented glitches, they focused on fixing serious bugs that corrupted data or made games unplayable. Minor glitches that didn't harm the core experience often remained unpatched, suggesting the developers recognized they weren't worth the resources needed to address them. The berry glitch that broke Ruby and Sapphire's clock represented the most serious technical issue in Generation 3. Players who experienced the glitch found that time-dependent events stopped functioning entirely, preventing berry growth and affecting certain Pokémon encounters. The patch distributed through newer games fixed this problem, though players who never connected their games to Fire Red, Leaf Green, or Emerald lived with broken clocks unless they utilized Nintendo's mail-in repair service. The technical cause of the berry glitch involved how the game's code calculated time differences between play sessions. A counter that tracked elapsed time would overflow after a certain duration, causing the calculation to fail and freeze time-based mechanics. This type of programming error represents common challenges in game development, where edge cases that rarely occur during testing become apparent only after widespread release and extended playtime. The sophistication required to patch games through cartridge-to-cartridge connections impressed technically minded players. The patch needed to identify which portions of code required updating, modify those sections without disrupting save data, and verify successful installation. Accomplishing this through link cable transfers rather than network downloads required careful planning and robust error checking. The fact that the system worked reliably demonstrated Game Freak's technical competence and problem-solving abilities. Modern game development's reliance on downloadable patches has advantages and disadvantages compared to Generation 3's approach. Current games can receive updates that fix bugs, adjust balance, and add content after release. However, this convenience sometimes leads to games shipping in incomplete states, with developers planning to fix problems post-launch. The Generation 3 era's inability to patch easily meant games needed to be more polished at release, as fixing issues afterward required creative solutions like the Ruby and Sapphire patch system. The shiny Zigzagoon reward for patching Ruby and Sapphire created a unique situation where a deliberate shiny Pokémon distribution occurred outside special events. Most shiny Pokémon appeared through random encounters with 1 in 8,192 odds, making them incredibly rare. The patching Zigzagoon bypassed this rarity, guaranteeing a shiny to anyone who installed the update. This made it special not just for its coloring, but for its unusual origin story. Players who received the shiny Zigzagoon often kept it as a memento of the patching process rather than using it competitively. Its low level and modest stats meant it didn't provide much battle utility, but its sentimental and historical value exceeded its gameplay worth. Years later, collectors sought Ruby and Sapphire cartridges that could still perform the patching process, as demonstrating it became increasingly difficult as link cables and compatible games grew scarcer. The distribution method also created questions about the Zigzagoon's legitimacy in trading communities. Since the patch was relatively unknown, players who received shiny Zigzagoons through legitimate patching sometimes faced suspicion that they had hacked or cloned the Pokémon. This led to some players documenting their patching process or keeping the original cartridges as proof. The situation highlighted how unusual distribution methods could create authentication, challenges that persisted long after the events themselves. The Fire Red and Leaf Green remakes that helped solve Generation 3's backward compatibility problems introduced numerous quality-of-life improvements over the original Red and Blue. The running shoes that first appeared in Ruby and Sapphire made traversing Kanto faster and less tedious. The expanded item storage meant players no longer struggled with extremely limited bag space that forced constant item management in the originals. These improvements made the remakes feel modern while preserving the core Red and Blue experience. The Sevii Islands, new post-game areas exclusive to Fire Red and Leaf Green, provided additional content that extended gameplay beyond the original Kanto journey. These islands introduced new Pokémon species unavailable in the Kanto mainland, created quests involving Team Rocket's remnants, and offered challenges appropriate for post-game teams. The islands felt like natural extensions of Kanto rather than arbitrary additions, as their tropical aesthetics contrasted pleasantly with the mainland's more varied climate zones. The wireless adapter bundled with Fire Red and Leaf Green represented Nintendo's first steps toward removing the link cable requirement that had defined Pokémon trading and battling since the series' inception. While the wireless adapters still required close physical proximity between Game Boy Advances, it eliminated the cumbersome cables that restricted player movement. This technological advancement paved the way for the Nintendo DS's built-in wireless capabilities that would fully revolutionize Pokémon's social features. The Mystery Gift system, updated from its Gold and Silver implementation, allowed players to receive special items and occasionally Pokémon through wireless connections. While this feature saw limited use during Fire Red and Leaf Green's active lifespan, it established infrastructure that future games would expand significantly. The concept of receiving special content through local wireless rather than requiring physical accessories or special cartridges simplified distribution logistics substantially. The Mystery Gift system, updated from its Gold and Silver implementation, allowed players to receive special items and occasionally Pokémon through wireless connections. While this feature saw limited use during Fire Red and Leaf Green's active lifespan, it established infrastructure that future games would expand significantly. The concept of receiving special content through local wireless rather than requiring physical accessories or special cartridges simplified distribution logistics substantially. The Pokémon storage system received improvements in Fire Red and Leaf Green that made organizing collections easier. The ability to select and move multiple Pokémon simultaneously reduced the time required to arrange boxes. Additional box customization options let players name and wallpaper their boxes, creating themed storage areas for different types or evolutionary families. These seemingly small improvements dramatically enhanced quality of life for players who maintained large collections. The trainer card customization options added another personal expression layer, allowing players to change their cards' colors and designs. Stars appeared on the card when players accomplished specific achievements, creating visible progress markers. Completing the Pokédex, winning specific challenges, and achieving certain milestones all added stars, with the ultimate goal of earning a 5-star trainer card. This achievement system provided long-term goals beyond simply beating the Elite Four. The updated graphics in Fire Red and Leaf Green brought Kanto into the modern era while preserving the region's essential character. Familiar locations looked better while maintaining recognizable layouts that longtime fans remembered. The visual improvements extended to Pokémon sprites, which featured more detail and better animations than their red and blue counterparts. These graphical enhancements made replaying Kanto feel fresh rather than simply nostalgic. The Fame Checker feature in Fire Red and Leaf Green provided a unique method of tracking accomplishments. NPCs throughout Kanto offered comments about the player's achievements when interacting with the Fame Checker, creating a sense that the character's actions had an impact on the region. As players defeated gym leaders, caught legendary Pokémon, or accomplished notable feats, more NPCs recognized and commented on these achievements. This feedback loop reinforced that the player was becoming a famous trainer. The Pokémon Network Center on the Sevier Islands introduced players to communication systems that would become standard in future games. While its functionality remained limited compared to later online features, it demonstrated Game Freak's vision for how Pokémon games might incorporate network connectivity. The center represented a stepping stone between Generation 3's local wireless and Generation 4's full online capabilities. Diamond and Pearl's release introduced the Nintendo DS's capabilities to Pokémon, fundamentally changing how players interacted with games. The dual screens allowed simultaneous display of battle action and move selection, eliminating menu navigation during combat. The touchscreen enabled direct interaction with menus and Pokémon, streamlining many tasks that required button inputs in previous generations. These interface improvements made the games more accessible while maintaining depth for experienced players. The Poketch device introduced in Diamond and Pearl utilized the touchscreen extensively, providing various apps that assisted with different gameplay tasks. A step counter, breeding checker, friendship evaluator, and berry tracker all appeared as Poketch applications that players could switch between freely. This device demonstrated creative use of the DS's unique hardware while providing genuine utility rather than just gimmicky touch controls. The underground system in Diamond and Pearl created a massive network of tunnels beneath Sinnoh where players could mine for fossils and gems, create secret bases, and participate in capture the flag games with others. This subterranean world added significant content beyond the surface adventure, rewarding exploration with rare items and evolution stones. The local wireless connectivity meant nearby friends could explore the underground together, creating cooperative experiences within a traditionally single-player game. The mining minigame combined luck and skill as players used the touchscreen to carefully excavate walls, watching for cracks that indicated valuable items. The hammer and pickaxe had limited uses before walls collapsed, forcing players to prioritize which spots to excavate. This simple but engaging activity provided relaxing breaks from battling and training while still offering meaningful rewards. Secret base decoration expanded in Diamond and Pearl's underground, with more furniture and customization options than Ruby and Sapphire's system offered. Players could create elaborate bases that showcased their achievements and aesthetic preferences. The local wireless allowed visiting friends' bases, creating social experiences around showing off creative designs. This sharing aspect made base decoration more rewarding than if bases existed only in isolation. The Capture the Flag mode added competitive elements to the underground, as players raced to steal each other's flags while defending their own. This multiplayer game provided a completely different experience from traditional Pokémon battles, testing speed and strategy rather than team strength. The mode demonstrated that Pokémon games could incorporate diverse gameplay types without losing their essential identity. The Global Trade Station revolutionized how players completed their Pokédexes by enabling trades with anyone worldwide rather than just local friends. Players could deposit Pokémon and specify which species they wanted in return, then go about their business while the system searched for matching offers. This asynchronous trading meant players no longer needed to coordinate schedules with trading partners, dramatically lowering barriers to completing collections. The GTS also introduced challenges, as some players made unreasonable requests, like asking for legendary Pokémon in exchange for common species. The system allowed these offers, but practically ensured they would never be fulfilled. Despite this issue, the GTS represented a massive improvement in trading accessibility, particularly for players who lacked local Pokémon communities. International trades became routine rather than rare special occasions. The underground fossil and gem mining provided resources for the game's seal customization system. Seals could be applied to Pokeball capsules, creating custom animations when Pokémon entered battle. Fire seals might create flame effects, while music seals added sound effects to the entrance. This purely cosmetic system allowed personal expression without affecting gameplay balance, letting players create elaborate entrance animations for their favorite Pokémon. The Sinnoh region's mythology and legendary Pokémon created the franchise's most elaborate creation story. Arceus, described as the creator of the Pokémon universe, supposedly brought forth Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, who controlled time, space, and antimatter respectively. This cosmic-scale lore elevated Sinnoh's legendary Pokémon beyond simple, powerful creatures, making them fundamental forces of reality. The story resonated with players who enjoyed the mythological depth Game Freak wove into the games. The Spear Pillar sequence, where Team Galactic attempted to use the legendary Pokémon to reshape reality, created one of the series' most dramatic climaxes. The stakes felt appropriately high, as failure meant the universe itself might be destroyed or altered beyond recognition. This raised the tension above typical evil team wants power plots, making the player's intervention genuinely important rather than just part of the expected narrative. Giratina's role as the guardian of the distortion world added complexity to Sinnoh's mythology. This alternate dimension existed outside normal space and time, following different physical laws where gravity and direction held no meaning. The distortion world's surreal environment created one of Pokémon's most visually striking locations, with platforms floating in impossible configurations and Giratina moving through both foreground and background. This area demonstrated the hardware capabilities of the Nintendo DS while creating a genuinely alien location. Platinum's expansion of the distortion world into a full dungeon to explore enhanced Giratina's mystique. Rather than a simple boss arena, the distortion world became a puzzle-filled maze that players needed to navigate carefully. The impossible geometry and shifting platforms created genuine navigation challenges, making reaching Giratina feel earned. This expanded treatment gave the legendary Pokémon appropriate build-up and importance. The physical special split implemented in Diamond and Pearl fundamentally changed how battles worked. Prior to Generation 4, whether a move was physical or special depended solely on its type, meaning a fire-type Pokémon with high physical attack couldn't effectively use fire moves. The split made each individual move either physical or special regardless of type, allowing Pokémon to use moves that matched their stat distributions. This change dramatically affected many Pokémon's viability, particularly those with stats that mismatched their type's previous physical special designation. Flareon, long considered weak due to lacking strong physical fire moves despite its high attack stat, suddenly became more viable when moves like Flare Blitz gave it options. Similarly, Gengar's Ghost-type moves became special attacks, matching its excellent special attack stat, rather than being physical moves that didn't utilize its strengths. The split required reclassifying over 300 moves, determining whether each should be physical or special based on its nature and attack animation. Game Freak needed to balance maintaining move identity with ensuring the change created more strategic variety. Some moves' classifications seemed arbitrary, but most made intuitive sense based on whether they involved physical contact or energy projection. The long-term impact of the physical special split on competitive Pokémon battling cannot be overstated. The change enabled countless new strategies as Pokémon could finally use moves that matched their stat distributions. Team building became more nuanced as players considered both a Pokémon's type and its physical special orientation when building movesets. This mechanical evolution represented one of the most significant improvements to the battle system since the original games. Heart Gold and Soul Silver's release brought Generation 4's mechanics to Johto, allowing players to experience the region with updated graphics and systems. The remakes maintained Gold and Silver's essential structure while incorporating features like the physical special split, expanded move pools, and quality of life improvements from Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. These enhancements made Heart Gold and Soul Silver definitive versions of the Generation 2 experience. The Pokeathlon introduced in Heart Gold and Soul Silver created athletic competitions that tested Pokemon's speed, power, skill, stamina, and jump statistics. These events provided alternatives to battles and contests, creating additional ways to interact with Pokemon. The variety of Pokeathlon events ensured different Pokemon excelled at different competitions, preventing any single species from dominating all categories. The Pokewalker peripheral bundled with Heart Gold and Soul Silver allowed players to transfer a single Pokemon to the small device and earn experience through walking. Each step registered by the Pokewalker's pedometer generated experience, encouraging physical activity while progressing in the game. The device also featured simple catching minigames where players could obtain Pokemon unavailable through normal gameplay, adding collection incentives. The Pokewalker courses unlocked as players progressed through the game, with later routes offering rarer Pokemon and better rewards. This progression structure meant the device remained useful throughout the entire playthrough rather than becoming obsolete after initial novelty wore off. The courses introduced Pokemon from other regions before they appeared in Johto naturally, allowing players to obtain favorites earlier than traditionally possible. The ability for Pokemon to follow the player character outside their Pokeballs, first seen in Yellow with Pikachu, returned in Heart Gold and Soul Silver for all species. Any Pokemon in the first party slot would appear behind the player, walking alongside them during exploration. This feature added personality and companionship to the journey, making the relationship between trainer and Pokemon feel more tangible. Different species had unique walking animations and interaction responses, rewarding players who experimented with different followers. The Safari Zone redesign in Heart Gold and Soul Silver allowed players to customize which Pokémon appeared in different areas. By placing specific objects and adjusting environmental factors, players could attract certain species to their customized zones. This system gave players unprecedented control over which Pokémon they could encounter, though it required them understanding complex rules about which objects attracted which species. The Battle Frontier's return in Heart Gold and Soul Silver brought Generation 3's post-game facilities to Johto with updated mechanics and Pokémon pools. Players could once again challenge the various facilities, testing their skills across different battle formats. The Frontier maintained its reputation as one of the series' most challenging post-game contents, requiring dozens of hours to earn all achievements and prizes. Black and White's release marked a fresh start for the series, as discussed earlier regarding its storytelling ambitions. The game's decision to include only new Pokémon until after becoming champion created an experience similar to the original Red and Blue, where every encounter felt novel and unfamiliar. This design choice divided the fanbase, with some appreciating the forced discovery while others missed their longtime favorites. The sprite animation in Black and White represented a significant visual upgrade from previous games. Every Pokémon sprite moved constantly during battle, creating a more dynamic and alive feeling. The animations ranged from subtle breathing to dramatic movements, with each species receiving unique animations that reflected their personalities. This attention to detail made battles more engaging to watch, even if the actual mechanics remained similar to previous generations. The rotation battle format introduced in Black and White placed 3 Pokémon on each side, with only the front position able to attack. Players could rotate their lineup each turn, bringing different Pokémon to the active position while moving others to the back. This format required predicting opponent strategies and positioning Pokémon advantageously, creating a 3-dimensional battle system that rewarded planning and adaptation. Triple battles expanded on rotation battles by allowing all 3 Pokémon on each side to act simultaneously. Positioning mattered significantly, as moves with limited range couldn't reach opponents across the field. Certain strategies revolved around protecting the center position or launching coordinated attacks. While triple battles never became popular in competitive play due to their complexity and slow pace, they represented Game Freak's willingness to experiment with fundamentally different battle structures. The Seasons system in Black and White changed Unova's appearance monthly, with different season corresponding to different month ranges. Winter covered areas in snow, autumn added fallen leaves, spring brought flowers, and summer returned greenery. These aesthetic changes created reasons to revisit areas throughout the year, as different seasonal appearances meant familiar locations looked fresh and different. Certain Pokémon and areas became accessible only during specific seasons, encouraging players to return periodically throughout the year. Deerling and Sawsbuck changed their appearances to match current seasons, demonstrating how environmental factors influenced Pokémon biology. This attention to ecological detail enriched Unova's world building, making the region feel like a living ecosystem rather than a static game world. The musical system allowed players to perform simple rhythm minigames in Pokémon musicals, creating performances that resembled contest shows but focused entirely on music and choreography. Pokémon wore accessories and performed dance moves in time with music, with better timing resulting in better performances. While less mechanically deep than contests, musicals provided lighthearted entertainment and another way to interact with Pokémon beyond battles. The Interlink area in Black and White created a hub for multiplayer interactions where players could meet others via wireless or online connections. Various activities became available through the Interlink, including intralink missions that allowed players to enter each other's games to complete objectives. These cooperative missions created novel multiplayer experiences as players worked together to achieve goals rather than competing directly. The hidden hollow locations scattered throughout Unova contained Pokémon with hidden abilities that couldn't be obtained through normal encounters. These special Pokémon required patient waiting for them to appear, as hidden hollows regenerated their contents based on step counts and time passed. The rarity of hidden ability Pokémon made them valuable for trading and breeding, creating another collection goal beyond standard Pokédex completion. The Dreamworld website connected to Black and White allowed players to upload Pokémon from their games to an online portal where they could play minigames, befriend other Pokémon, and transfer them back to their cartridges. This unusual cross-platform experience showed Game Freak experimenting with integrating online services into Pokémon gameplay. While the Dreamworld eventually shut down, as it represented an ambitious attempt to extend Pokémon beyond handheld consoles. Black 2 and White 2's release as proper sequels rather than enhanced versions marked a franchise first. The games took place 2 years after Black and White, showing how Unova changed during that time period. New areas opened while others transformed, creating a familiar yet distinct region. The decision to create sequels demonstrated confidence in the Generation 5 at Foundation, believing the setting and characters deserved continued exploration rather than just refinement. The Pokestar Studios feature in Black 2 and White 2 let players participate in movie productions, acting out scenes in scripted battles. Different outcomes created different films, with players able to build collections of completed movies. While the feature received mixed reception, it represented another attempt to diversify gameplay beyond traditional battling and collecting. The production values in the studio segments showed attention to detail, with elaborate scenarios and humorous writing. The PWT Pokémon World Tournament brought back gym leaders and champions from all previous regions, creating a celebration of the franchise's history. Players could battle iconic characters using their signature Pokémon teams, creating dream matchups that had never been possible before. The tournament format and variety of participants made the PWT substantial post-game content that honored the series' legacy while providing serious challenges. The memory system introduced in Black 2 and White 2 allowed players to record and replay battles. This feature became invaluable for competitive players who wanted to analyze their matches and learn from mistakes. Sharing battle videos let players showcase impressive victories or funny moments, creating another form of social content beyond traditional trading and battling. The difficulty options in Black 2 and White 2 represented the first time Pokémon games allowed players to adjust challenge levels. Easy mode lowered opponent levels and made battles more manageable, while challenge mode increased difficulty for experienced players seeking tougher competition. The implementation proved controversial, as accessing these modes required trading keys between cartridges rather than simply selecting them from menus. Despite the awkward unlock system, the difficulty options acknowledged that Pokémon players had varying skill levels and preferences. The roster completion in Black 2 and White 2 became easier than in Black and White, as the regional Pokédex expanded significantly to include many Pokémon from previous generations. This change addressed one of the main criticisms of the original Black and White, allowing players to catch longtime favorites during their primary playthrough rather than waiting until post-game. The expanded Pokédex created more team-building variety without sacrificing the new Unova Pokémon that defined Generation 5. Generation 6's release on the Nintendo 3DS brought Pokémon into three-dimensional graphics for the first time in the main series. X and Y rendered characters and Pokémon in full 3 dimensions, allowing dynamic camera angles and more cinematic presentations. This transition represented the series' largest visual overhaul, requiring every Pokémon to be modeled in 3D rather than relying on sprites. The Mega Evolution mechanic, introduced in X and Y, allowed certain Pokémon to temporarily transform during battle into more powerful forms. This system required both the Pokémon and trainer to hold specific items and share a strong bond, reflecting the series' themes about trainer-Pokémon relationships. Mega Evolutions provided dramatic power boosts while adding strategic considerations about when to Mega Evolve during battles. The Fairy type's introduction in Generation 6 marked the first new type addition since Gold and Silver introduced Dark and Steel types. Fairy typing was specifically designed to counter Dragon types, which had become overwhelmingly powerful in competitive play. The new type also granted resistance to Dark and Fighting moves while being weak to Poison and Steel, creating new strategic considerations throughout the battle system. The Pokémon Amy feature utilized the 3DS's touchscreen to let players directly interact with their Pokémon through petting, feeding, and playing minigames. This system built affection, which provided minor battle benefits like increased critical hit rates or occasional evasion of attacks. While these benefits were modest, the ability to physically interact with Pokémon created emotional connections beyond what previous games offered. The player search system revolutionized online interactions by allowing simultaneous searching for trades, battles, and O-powers. Players could remain connected constantly, receiving notifications when others wanted to interact. This persistent online presence made multiplayer feel integrated rather than requiring deliberate connection setup before each interaction. The ease of finding battle partners or trading opportunities increased social engagement significantly. O-powers, temporary boosts that players could share with others, created cooperative multiplayer experiences where helping others provided reciprocal benefits. Players could activate O-powers that boosted experience gained, increased capture rates, or provided other advantages. The social nature of O-powers encouraged friendly interactions, as receiving powers from others and passing them forward built community goodwill. Super training. Minigames made EV training visible and accessible for the first time, allowing players to directly boost specific stats through minigames rather than battling specific Pokémon species. This transparency demystified hidden mechanics that previously required outside research to understand. Casual players could now optimize their Pokémon without needing to understand complex effort-value systems. The PSS integration with Pokémon Amy, Super Training, and normal gameplay created a unified experience where players transitioned smoothly between activities. The bottom screen constantly displayed online status and activity options, making connectivity feel natural rather than segmented. This design philosophy reflected modern gaming's emphasis on persistent online presence and easy social interaction. The PSS integration with Pokémon Amy, Super Training, and normal gameplay created a unified experience where players transitioned smoothly between activities. The bottom screen constantly displayed online status and activity options, making connectivity feel natural rather than segmented. This design philosophy reflected modern gaming's emphasis on persistent online presence and easy social interaction. The Kalos region's design drew heavily from France, with locations referencing Paris landmarks, French countryside aesthetics, and European architecture. Lumiose City served as the region's centerpiece, a sprawling metropolis with radiating streets reminiscent of Paris's layout. The city's scale dwarfed previous urban areas in Pokémon games, with numerous districts, shops, and activities creating a genuinely metropolitan feel. Navigating Lumiose required either careful attention to the map or frequent use of taxi services. The boutiques scattered throughout Kalos allowed unprecedented character customization, letting players change hairstyles, outfits, and accessories. This feature had been requested by fans for years, as previous games limited players to preset character appearances. The variety of clothing options meant each player's character could look unique, reflecting personal style preferences. Different boutiques carried different selections, encouraging exploration to find all available options. The roller skates provided faster movement than running while adding style to traversal. Players could perform tricks while skating, creating satisfying movement that felt more dynamic than simply running from place to place. The skates became available early in the journey, meaning players spent most of their Kalos adventures skating rather than walking. This seemingly minor addition significantly improved how the game felt to play, as movement became smoother and more enjoyable. The Lumiose City Gym puzzle required players to answer trivia questions about Pokémon to progress. Wrong answers triggered battles, while correct responses allowed advancement toward the gym leader. This quiz format tested player knowledge rather than just battle prowess, creating a different type of challenge. Some questions were straightforward, while others required careful thought, making the gym memorable for reasons beyond just the battle with Clement. The Friend Safari feature provided a unique way to catch Pokémon with hidden abilities and good individual values. Each player's safari contained the 3 Pokémon types based on their friend code, meaning adding more friends expanded available species. This system encouraged social interaction beyond just battling or trading, as simply adding friends provided tangible gameplay benefits. The Friend Safari became popular for obtaining competitive Pokémon due to the guaranteed high stats. The Fairy type's introduction affected hundreds of existing Pokémon, as many species received the new typing retroactively. Clefairy, Jigglypuff, and several other species that had been normal type became pure Fairy type. Others, like Azumarill, gained Fairy as a secondary type, changing their strengths and weaknesses significantly. These typing adjustments created renewed interest in older Pokémon as players reevaluated their competitive viability with new type combinations. Mega Evolution's impact on competitive battling was substantial, as it allowed certain Pokémon to reach power levels previously unavailable. Some Mega Evolutions were so powerful they faced bans in certain competitive formats, as their strength warped team building around either using them or specifically countering them. Mega Rayquaza, in particular, became infamous for being banned even from the tier where other Mega Evolutions were allowed, demonstrating that not all power boosts were created equal. The Mega Evolution animation sequences showcased the 3DS's graphical capabilities, with dramatic transformations that emphasized the power being unleashed. Each Mega Evolution had unique animations reflecting the Pokémon's personality and new form. The spectacle of Mega Evolution made these transformations feel important and exciting, elevating them above simple form changes. The animation quality demonstrated the care put into making Mega Evolution a centerpiece feature. The post-game Looker missions in X and Y told a detective story involving the recurring character Looker investigating suspicious activities in Lumiose City. These missions featured more narrative depth than typical post-game content, with character development and plot twists. The missions showcased that Pokémon games could tell meaningful stories outside the main campaign, creating emotional moments that resonated with players. The Battle Maison returned the battle facility concept to Generation 6 with a format similar to previous games' battle towers. Players faced increasingly difficult opponents in singles, doubles, triples, or rotation formats. The Maison challenged players to maintain winning streaks across many battles, testing team composition and strategic execution. Earning enough battle points unlocked rare items and provided resources for competitive team building. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire's release as Generation 3, Remakes brought Hoenn into 3D while updating mechanics to Generation 6 standards. The games maintained the core Ruby and Sapphire experience while incorporating features like Mega Evolution, Fairy, types, and modern battle mechanics. The Delta episode post-game story expanded Hoenn's lore significantly, introducing new characters and explaining Mega Evolution's origins within the game's universe. The soaring mechanic in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire let players fly freely around Hoenn on Megalatios or Megalatias, discovering hidden areas and encountering legendary Pokémon from previous generations. This freedom of movement created a sense of mastery over the region, as players could swoop down to any location rather than selecting destinations from a menu. The soaring system demonstrated how remakes could enhance original games with features impossible on older hardware. The secret base system expanded dramatically in the remakes, with more customization options and the ability to share bases with players worldwide through Street Pass and QR codes. Players could create elaborate bases showcasing their creativity, then challenge visitors to battles using preset teams. The global sharing meant players encountered bases from around the world, creating a sense of worldwide community within the game. The contest. Spectacular updated Hoenn's contest system with new moves, better graphics, and costume options for Pokémon. The remade contests maintained the original system's appeal while improving presentation and adding depth to strategies. The variety of contest categories meant different Pokémon excelled in different competitions, encouraging players to raise diverse teams rather than focusing solely on battle viability. The primal reversion mechanic, introduced for Groudon and Kyogre, provided a Generation 6 specific power boost similar to Mega Evolution, but tied to the legendary Pokémon's lore. Primal forms represented these Pokémon's original ancient power, connecting gameplay mechanics to narrative elements. The dramatic transformations during key story moments emphasized these Pokémon's importance to Hoenn's creation myths. The Dex Nav feature revolutionized wild Pokémon encounters by showing which species inhabited each area and tracking search levels for each. As players encountered specific species repeatedly, the Dex Nav provided information about their potential moves, abilities, and even let players find ones with egg moves or hidden abilities. This system made hunting for specific Pokémon much more targeted and rewarding than random encounters. The Dex Nav's ability to show Pokémon moving in the overworld before encounters began added immersion and allowed players to choose whether to engage. Sneaking up on Pokémon became a minigame where careful movement resulted in better encounters. This interactivity made catching Pokémon feel more engaging than simply walking through grass hoping for desired species to appear randomly. Generation 7's release on Nintendo 3DS brought Pokémon to the Alola region, inspired by Hawaii's tropical islands and culture. Sun and Moon replaced the traditional gym system with island trials, creating a fresh structure that maintained the progression's satisfaction while offering new experiences. Each trial involved completing tasks specific to the trial's theme before facing a powerful totem Pokémon in battle. The totem Pokémon battles introduced a new challenge format where the opponent automatically received stat boosts and could call for ally Pokémon to join the battle. These fights required more strategy than typical trainer battles, as dealing with multiple opponents while the totem held stat advantages demanded careful planning. The totem battles provided memorable challenges that distinguished trials from gym battles. The island kahunas served as each island's strongest trainers, providing climactic battles after completing that island's trials. These fights functioned similarly to gym leader battles while feeling distinct due to their placement at the end of island storylines rather than in dedicated gym buildings. The Grand Trials Against. Kahunas granted Z crystals, powerful items that enabled special moves during battles. Z moves allowed Pokemon to unleash powerful attacks once per battle after performing synchronized poses with their trainer. Each type had a corresponding Z move, with some specific Pokemon having exclusive variations. The theatrical poses and dramatic animations made Z moves feel impactful and exciting, creating climactic moments during important battles. The once per battle limitation ensured Z moves added strategic depth rather than simply overwhelming opponents with constant power. The removal of HMs in favor of ride Pokemon freed up move slots and meant players no longer needed team members solely for field movement. Ride Pokemon provided transportation and obstacle navigation without occupying party slots, allowing teams built purely for battling. This quality of life improvement addressed a long-standing frustration where players felt forced to carry Pokemon they didn't want just to access certain areas. The Alola forms introduced regional variants of Generation 1 Pokemon with different typings and appearances adapted to Alola's climate. Alolan Vulpix became an ice type, living in snowy mountains, while Alolan Exeggutor grew dramatically taller, becoming a grass/dragon type. These regional forms provided fresh takes on familiar Pokemon while demonstrating how environment shaped species adaptation. The concept would be expanded in future generations with additional regional variants. The Rotom Dex combined the traditional Pokédex with a companion character that offered advice and commentary throughout the journey. Rotom's personality developed as the story progressed, creating a sense of friendship with the helpful device. While some players found Rotom's frequent interruptions annoying, others appreciated having a companion character integrated into gameplay rather than just appearing in cutscenes. The Festival Plaza replaced the PSS as Generation 7's online hub, providing a location where players gathered to trade, battle, and participate in various minigames. Shops in the plaza offered rare items and services that improved as the plaza leveled up through activity. While the Festival Plaza offered robust functionality, many players preferred the PSS's integration into the bottom screen over needing to access a separate area for online features. The Poképelago provided a use for boxed Pokemon, as they could visit islands where they explored, found items, and even trained to gain experience. This system meant benched Pokemon remained useful rather than sitting ignored in storage. The Pelago developed as players unlocked new islands and upgraded facilities, creating a passive progression system that rewarded long-term play. The SOS battle mechanic meant wild Pokemon could call for help when their HP dropped low, bringing ally Pokemon into battle. This created situations where catching weakened Pokemon became difficult as new allies kept appearing. While frustrating when trying to catch specific species, SOS battles provided the easiest method for shiny hunting in Generation 7, as chained encounters dramatically increased shiny appearance rates. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon's release as enhanced versions, rather than true sequels, provided expanded storylines, additional features, and a different take on Alola's story. The games introduced new forms for legendary Pokemon and expanded the post-game significantly with Rainbow Rocket an organization bringing together all previous games' villain team leaders. This fan service-heavy postgame celebrated the franchise's history while providing substantial challenge. The Ultra Wormhole travel mechanic let players surf through dimensional portals, collecting light orbs and occasionally encountering legendary Pokémon from previous generations. This minigame provided a method for obtaining legendaries beyond simple event distributions, as skilled players could consistently access powerful Pokémon. The trippy visuals and unique gameplay made wormhole travel memorable beyond just the rewards. Generation 8's move to Nintendo Switch brought Pokémon to home consoles for the first time in the main series. Sword and Shield rendered the Galar region with improved graphics, taking advantage of the Switch's superior hardware. The Wild Area introduced the first truly open-world style area in main series Pokémon, where players could explore freely with a controllable camera and encounter diverse Pokémon based on weather conditions. The Dynamax mechanic allowed any Pokémon to temporarily grow to massive size during battles in specific locations. Dynamaxed Pokémon gained increased HP and access to powerful max moves, creating 3 turn windows of overwhelming power. The size transformations and dramatic battle presentation emphasized the spectacle of Dynamax encounters, making important battles feel appropriately epic. Gigantamax forms provided unique appearances for specific Pokémon species when Dynamaxed, similar to Mega Evolution, but temporary and limited to certain individuals. These special forms had exclusive G-Max moves that provided additional effects beyond standard max moves. Obtaining Gigantamax Pokémon required participating in max raid battles or special distributions, adding collectible value beyond normal specimens. Max raid battles introduced cooperative multiplayer to the main series, as 4 players teamed up to battle powerful Dynamaxed wild Pokémon. These raids require coordination and strategy, as the Dynamax Pokémon could attack multiple times per turn and put up shields that needed to be broken. Successful raids granted rare items and the opportunity to catch the raid Pokémon, creating incentive to participate repeatedly. The wild area's weather-dependent spawns meant different Pokémon appeared based on current conditions. Rain brought water types, sandstorms attracted ground types, and fog enabled ghost-type encounters. This weather system created reasons to revisit the wild area regularly, as changing conditions meant different species became available. The dynamic ecosystem made the area feel alive and constantly shifting. The removal of the National Pokédex sparked controversy, as not all Pokémon could be transferred into Sword and Shield. This decision, driven by the enormous roster's size and the resources required to create high-quality 3D models and animations for all species, disappointed fans who expected to bring their entire collections forward. Game Freak stated this would be standard going forward, though updates and DLC eventually added more Pokémon to Sword and Shield's available roster. The Expansion Pass DLC introduced the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra, adding substantial new areas and storylines. These expansion areas brought back many Pokémon absent from the base game, while introducing new legendary encounters and gameplay features. The DLC model represented a new approach for Pokémon, allowing continued content additions rather than releasing enhanced versions as separate games. The Crown Tundra's Dynamax adventures created randomly generated paths through max raid battle sequences, with players choosing paths and catching Pokémon along the way toward legendary encounters. This roguelike inspired mode provided substantial replay value, as each adventure differed based on random selections and player choices. The ability to keep one Pokémon from each adventure meant players gradually built collections of rare species. The Galarian Star Tournament brought back familiar characters for post-game battles in a tournament format. Players could partner with various characters, experiencing different dialogue and team combinations. This feature celebrated the game's cast while providing challenging in-game battles that remained engaging even after completing the main story. Generation 9's release as Pokémon Scarlet and Violet introduced the first fully open-world main series games, where players could tackle gym challenges, storylines, and exploration in any order. The Palia region eliminated traditional routes in favor of seamless environments where players could roam freely. This design philosophy represented the series' most dramatic structural change since the original games. The 3 parallel storylines allowed players to pursue gym battles, Team Star confrontations, or Titan Pokémon hunts in whatever order they preferred. This flexibility meant each player's journey could differ significantly based on which objectives they prioritized. The freedom of choice respected player agency while still providing guided narrative experiences within each storyline. The terrestrial phenomenon introduced the Terra type mechanic, where Pokémon could temporarily change their type to match their Terra type during battle. This system added strategic depth, as players could turn defensive type disadvantages into advantages or boost same type attack bonuses even further. The crystalline transformations provided visual spectacle, while the strategic implications created new competitive considerations. Terra raid battles expanded on the max raid concept, with even more challenging encounters against Terra-stylized Pokémon. These raids required careful team coordination and strategy, as the strongest raids tested even veteran players. The community-driven nature of finding and sharing raid locations created social engagement beyond just the battles themselves. The Let's Go feature allowed players to send out lead Pokémon to automatically battle wild encounters, streamlining grinding and making travel through previously explored areas less tedious. The Pokémon would collect experience and items independently, though players could still engage in traditional battles when desired. This auto-battle system respected player time while maintaining traditional battle options for those who preferred them. The sandwich-making system provided temporary buffs that increased encounter rates, boosted shiny odds, or enhanced experience gain based on ingredients used. Creating sandwiches became a minigame, where ingredient placement affected sandwich quality and buff strength. The system then added variety to buff acquisition while incorporating the Palia region's culinary culture into gameplay mechanics. The Academy classes provided world building through lessons about Pokémon biology, history, and battle mechanics. While optional, these classes offered rewards for attendance and added narrative depth to Palia's society. The school setting integrated naturally into the region's design, creating a home base that felt connected to the broader world. The Area Zero expedition, representing the climax of the main story, took players into the region's mysterious crater where time and space became unstable. The alien environment and powerful Pokémon created a sense of danger and discovery that elevated the final chapters. The revelations about the region's past and the professor's fate provided emotional weight that resonated with players. The DLC additions continued Generation 9's story with new areas and mysteries to explore. The Teal Mask took players to Kitakami during a school trip, while the Indigo Disc returned to Blueberry Academy's underwater campus. These expansions added substantial content while developing characters and storylines begun in the base games. The Pokémon Home Service consolidated storage across multiple games, allowing transfers between Switch titles and creating a centralized collection management system. This cloud-based storage ensured collections remained safe, even if individual game cartridges were lost or damaged. The subscription model generated ongoing revenue, while providing valuable service to dedicated players. The competitive battling scene evolved continuously across generations, with each mechanical addition creating new strategies and team compositions. Abilities, held items, Mega Evolution, Z-moves, Dynamax, and Terastallization all required adaptations from competitive players. The constant evolution kept competitive play fresh while building on established strategic foundations. The Smogon community developed tier systems separating Pokémon by power level, ensuring species with different competitive viabilities could all see use. OU, overused, UU, underused, RU, rarely used, and NU, never used, tiers created separate metagames where previously outclassed Pokémon became viable. This tier system preserved competitive diversity across the entire roster rather than limiting play to only the strongest species. The VGC, Video Game Championships format, used official rules and formats for competitive play, creating a parallel competitive scene to Smogon's fan-driven tiers. VGC typically featured doubles battles with various rule sets that changed annually, keeping the format dynamic the world. Championships each year showcased the highest level of competitive play, attracting top players globally. The breeding mechanics that enabled competitive team building grew increasingly sophisticated across generations. The Destiny Knot item, passing down 5 IVs from parents, made breeding perfect stat Pokémon much faster than in early generations. The ability to pass down egg moves, hidden abilities, and even Pokéball types meant breeding could create highly customized Pokémon that reflected specific strategic goals. The hyper-training system introduced in Generation 7 allowed maximizing Pokémon's stats without perfect breeding, though at significant resource cost. This feature made event-exclusive legendary Pokémon competitively viable even with suboptimal stats. The accessibility improvements meant more players could participate in competitive battling without spending hundreds of hours breeding. The Nature Mints and Ability Capsules introduced quality-of-life features that let players adjust their Pokémon without needing to catch or breed new ones. These items reduce tedium while maintaining some resource cost, balancing convenience against trivializing the optimization process. The incremental accessibility improvements demonstrated Game Freak's recognition that competitive barriers should stem from strategy rather than time investment. The shiny hunting community developed extensive knowledge about methods for increasing shiny encounter rates. Chaining encounters, breeding with foreign Pokémon, and various generation-specific techniques all improved odds beyond the base rarity. The dedication required for shiny collecting created communities where rare finds garnered admiration and trading shinies became a social currency. The Masuda method, named after director Junichi Masuda, increased shiny odds when breeding Pokémon from games with different language settings. This technique encouraged international trading while making shiny breeding more feasible. The method became standard practice for serious shiny hunters, as the improved odds justified the effort of obtaining foreign breeding partners. The Shiny Charm item, obtainable by completing the Pokédex, further improved shiny encounter rates. This reward for completion encouraged players to catch all available Pokémon rather than just focusing on personal favorites. The charms stacking with other shiny hunting methods meant dedicated collectors could find shinies with reasonable consistency. The soft resetting technique for hunting legendary Pokémon required patience, as players saved before encounters and repeatedly reset their games until the legendary appeared shiny. Some hunts took thousands of resets, requiring dedication spanning weeks or months. The payoff of finally seeing a shiny legendary made the effort worthwhile for dedicated hunters. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed drifting through these quiet moments, there's another video waiting on the left of your screen. Let it play while you rest. You might discover something gentle before sleep takes you.